this work with you. So real quick, for those who don't know me, my name is Mike Flynn. I run the math leadership programs at Mount Holyoke College. I taught second grade for 14 years. I'm deeply invested in the world of mathematics. But one of the things that I really enjoy doing is I do deep dives into thinking. I get interested in an idea, and then I immerse myself in it for months on end, reading and researching and testing things out and going into classrooms. And then I share it. I like to share it this way. I've done things on like all the math practice standards. I've done things around fluency, algebraic reasoning in K-8 classrooms, resistance, understanding resistance in math education, coaching, leadership development. And this is one of my newer ones here, which is understanding how we create moments in the math classroom that resonate with kids for years to come. Like that's ideally as teachers, we want to have that kind of impact. And so I've done a deep dive as well on this. And so I like to share a lot of my sort of the support materials. If you go to my website, mathleadership.org, one of the bars at the top in the menu is presentations, and you can find this title and then all the supporting resources of every article, book, video, anything that I dove into to put this presentation together is there. I always like to invite people to take the same journey that I did. So let's go ahead and dig into this work. Last thing for those who came in late, if you text 44222, you'll get a prompt, and it texts math moments, the word, one word, math moments to 44222. You'll get the slides sent to you directly. If you don't want to do that, you can email me if you'd like them. You'll notice I also do slide sharing with the picture in picture. So I'll toggle between this view and then also just doing full screen view of the slides as well, kind of both as much as possible. So let's jump in. We're going to start talking about moments and what makes moments really resonate and stand out in the world here for us. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to advance my slide to the next one here. We're going to start by having you all reflect on a defining moment from when you were in elementary school. So I want you to think about a time when you were a kid that what stands out? What's the memory that stands out for you? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? And I'm going to share mine right now as you're reflecting on yours. And mine starts when I was in kindergarten. When I met Mr. Finn, our principal, the first time. I was getting picked up at the office early with my sister. My mom was coming to get us for an appointment. And Mr. Finn was blasting a kid in a tone of voice I've never heard in my life before. I was totally traumatized, bawled. I just cried. The man absolutely terrified me. I remember being in the car telling my sister, I am never going in that office again. That was my first time meeting Mr. Finn. That's not the moment. That's a defining moment. This is a backstory. But I really did for the entire year of kindergarten. I actually walked around that office as far as I could just to avoid that man as much as possible. But a year later, my friend Scott and I found a Playboy at his dad's house and thought it'd be a good idea to bring it to school. Right? Like what's conspicuous about two first graders surrounded by every fifth and sixth grade boy on the playground, right? But the funny thing is we actually didn't get caught, even though we had a mob of boys out there looking at it. In fact, what we did is we devised a plan that at the top of every hour, I would go down to the fifth and sixth grade boys' bathroom with the magazine, and we'd look at it, and it was bedlam in there. Like everyone was. It was so crowded. It was my 16 candles moment, and again, we didn't get caught. It was kind of funny. All day long, I would just sort of sneak in there, and eventually, by the end of the day, I was the king of the school. I was like on top of the world, and I flew a little too close to the sun because as we were boarding the bus to go home, I was invited to sit in the back with the fifth and sixth graders, which is like where all the cool kids would sit. And of course, they wanted to see the magazine again. So I take it out. And as soon as it gets out of in my hands, one of the sixth graders ripped it out of my hands and they start tearing pages out of it. And then they start putting it up against the windows of the bus. And the thing is, we're still in the school parking lot, mind you. And Mr. Finn's right outside. And he looks up and sees a wall of filth on the side of the bus and comes flying. And I could see him coming. I'm like, oh man, this is not good. And he boards the bus and demands to know who it is. And my buddies, my friends, these kids who've been hanging with me all day long ratted me out. They ratted, and I couldn't believe it. And I got marched right to Mr. Finn's office, and I got it just as bad as Sean Colby got it the year before. That terrified me. And I'd like to say that just set me on the right course, but it didn't. Actually, I continued from that point on, really, just being mischievous. I was the class clown. I got in lots of trouble. And that was going to be pretty much my relationship with Mr. Flynn. Is basically I would get in trouble and get sent, sometimes sent home, get grounded, all of these things. And that pretty much would have set the stage for me in school if fate didn't have it that in 5th grade I broke my hand. And when I broke my hand, I wasn't allowed to go outside because teachers were afraid of what I'd do with the cast. They thought I'd hurt someone, probably rightfully so. I was a little hyperactive at the time. But while my friends went out to recess, I had to go to the library by myself, and I was bored out of my mind. And one day the librarian came up and said, Mike, Mr. Flynn would like to see you in his office. And I thought, oh, no, because earlier that day, my friend Scott and I were in the bathroom. We invented a game called Money Bowl, where we basically, boys would come in, we'd take our lunch money and you would drop quarters into the toilet, dirty toilet, mind you. And if the money got high enough and you wanted it and you reached in, you could keep it. That's, by the way, that's just what we do, boys, in the bathroom. It's just chaos in there, by the way. So we were doing it. If you're curious, by the way, Todd Listowski, 75 cents every time. He always would go and he didn't care. So I thought we were busted on Money Bowl, and I get into his office and he's smiling, which means he doesn't know about Money Bowl. And as we're sitting, as I get in there, he asked me how my hand's doing, asked me how I like being in the library during recess. I didn't really like it too much. And he said he had an idea for me. He pushed a book across his desk and he said, have you ever read this? I said, no. And he said, this is my absolute favorite book. And it would mean a lot to me, Mike, if you would come here during recess and read the book to me. I'd love that. I think it'd be a good thing for you, be a good thing for me. And so I did. This is a man that I was terrified of and hated getting in trouble. I thought he hated me. And here I am now with a new sort of look at our relationship. And so we did that every single day for recess. I would go there and read this book with him. And sometimes we talk about the book, and sometimes he would just he'd give me advice. And one thing he said that stood out to me was, he said, I had a gift for making people laugh. And he said, my problem is I don't know how to turn it on and off, like when to turn it on and when to turn it off. He said, as soon as you figure that out, Mike, you're going to go places. And that stood out to me. And so we got to the end of the book, and it was a Friday afternoon, and we didn't finish it. We were the last chapter. And I just said, can we please finish it? And he's like, no, you got to get back to class. And I'm like, but can I just take it home then? He said, nope, we started it together. We're going to finish it together. And so for the first time in my life, I left school on Friday wishing it were Monday. But on Saturday, my mom came out when my brother and I were outside playing, and she said she had some bad news. And she had the morning paper, and she said, Mr. Flynn died. So Friday afternoon after I left, Mr. Flynn later that afternoon had a heart attack, and he passed away. And it was the first death I've ever experienced in my life. I was fortunate. I didn't lose any family members or friends and stuff as a kid. So in 5th grade, I really encountered death for the first time. And I was beside myself. And I remember going back to school on that Monday, people were crying. And at one point, Ms. Durzanowski needed someone to run a note to the office. And I volunteered to go. And I got in there, and the secretary saw me, and I said, could I go in his office? And she knew what I wanted to do. And I wanted to just read the book. And I went in there, the book was still there where we left it. And I picked it up, and I was going to finish it. And then I just thought, he said, we started it together and we're going to finish it together. So I put the book down and I walked away. And that's kind of the end of that part of that story. I'll touch back on Mr. Flynn in a moment. But the reason I'm sharing this right now is every aspect of Mr. Flynn and my experience with that is so visceral. I can recall smells and sounds and feelings, and it's carved into my brain. And there's something interesting, because I can't do that with every memory. And I think it's true for all of you. The things that you conjure when I ask you to think about your defining moment, there's probably a moment where you have such a vivid memory of those experiences, where other aspects of do you remember what your 3rd grade textbook cover looked like for science? You probably don't, right? So why is it that certain memories are carved into our brains and other things just sort of disappear? That was what got me curious. And I had read this book called The Power of Moments by Chip and Dan Heath that got me thinking about this, because the whole book is on that. Why do we remember certain things and forget others? And the whole beauty of this book was that once we understand the psychology of why our memories work, we can use those elements to orchestrate moments that are going to resonate for other people. So of course, I start thinking of the educational implications of this. If we can leverage what makes memories and moments stand out long-term for people, and we build our lessons around those elements, then we should be able to create moments for our students to have powerful experiences that they'll take with them. And so I embarked on this big journey of understanding that, and that's what I'm going to share with you today. So let's dig into this from the math lens. So there are 4 elements of defining moments. These are elevation, pride, insight, and connection. And so I'm going to go to the large screen so you can see that here. So this is these are the 4 elements. We're going to look at 2 very deeply in the math world today, and then touch on 2. So elevation and insight, we'll do the deep dive. Pride and connection, we'll do a light touch with. If you're trying to remember these, there's a handy dandy acronym, EPIC. So if you think of epic moments, these are the 4 elements, and we're going to consider each one within the math space. So let's start with elevation. So elevation, according to Chip and Dan Heath, defining moments rise above the everyday. They provoke not just transient happiness, but memorable delight. That's what we're going for. So what we'll do now is let's look at this. So the first really interesting element of this work with Chip and Dan Heath and is building these peak moments that stand out. So what they say, basically, Fredrickson and Kahneman came up with this idea of this peak end rule. And the premise behind it is that we as humans will judge an experience, whether it's an experience at a restaurant, a theater, a show at a theater, math class, based on how we felt at the most intense moments and at the ends, the beginning and the end, the transition times. And so if you sort of look at this, we sort of have positive and negative experiences within any event. So like a high moment, we would call a peak experience. These are like, something exciting, happy. There's also pit moments. Either one of these, peaks and pits, are intense moments. And so the judgment that we would give on an experience would be whichever of these was more intense. So in this case, we have a very strong peak, which is higher than the pit. So we would probably judge an experience more favorably. So for example, in here, maybe we went to a restaurant and the peak moment was we had the best meal we've ever had in our entire life. Every bite was a journey of excitement. And so we had that was a really high peak moment. Maybe the wait staff was not as friendly as we'd like them to be. It was kind of a pit moment. But if the wait staff's rudeness paled in comparison to the deliciousness of the food, as we recall that event later on, we're going to have a more positive, memorable experience from that. As the other part is that transitions, we tend to remember the beginnings of events and ends of events really importantly. Well, this has a lot of implications for classrooms, because if we think about our class, for instance, or like, oops, sorry, this is I was thinking about like football. So let me go to football first. So if we think about like the way football works out, if you play football or any sport for that matter, there are things that are really exciting. Like there's like the conditioning is not so fun. That's a pit moment. Scrimmages are kind of like a peak moment. Drills, maybe not as much fun, but that football game, that Sunday game or Friday game, if you're playing high school ball, is such a positive experience that we often, even if those other pits were really hard, we'll look back and go back and play football again because the experience we had at those peak moments was so exciting. Well, if we think about a typical math class or an online class these days, how might you think we would gauge that? What would the line look like for like a typical remote learning class these days? And so I'd like you just right now with your fingers, go ahead and just draw what you think that line kind of looks like. What do you think? Go right across your screen with your camera. What would you say the line looks like? And typically when I've asked people this, it's kind of like, it feels like this, right? So we've got like, it's kind of, it's not what we want it to be. And a lot of times, like with like a math class or something, like we might begin with like a homework review, and at the end is homework assigned and stuff. And so what we see here is like almost like missed opportunities where we're not taking advantage of the beginnings and the ends, and we're not orchestrating this to have really strong peak moments. So let's look at how we might fix that. Turns out there's a recipe for building peak moments. So if we want to build a peak moment in our math class, the 3 things we need to do is boost sensory appeal, raise the stakes, and break the script. And I'll explain each one of these to you. So boosting sensory appeal, basically, like we as humans interact with our world through our senses. So the more we can elevate the senses, the more that moment's going to stand out. Now, it doesn't mean that like that's like great math pedagogy. I'm not saying, but if you were to take the time to sort of build an experience that heightens sensory awareness, people are going to remember it more. So within a classroom, it's a little easier because we have access to manipulatives and tools and things, and we can sort of set the mood. In the remote space, it's a little trickier, but we can still do that. We're going to try one today. Raising the stakes means asking more investment on the part of your students. Not have a sit and get, but actually have them do something, have them actually have to invest part of themselves, have them take a risk. Anything where students have to put more of themselves out there is raising the stakes, which also heightens the experience. And breaking the script means to do things differently, disrupt the norms and the sort of schemas that students have for what math class is. So when you do all three of these things stand out. So we're going to try something right now. We're going to do a math task. I'm going to ask you to watch a video first to set this up. So here we go. As you watch the video in the chat, I'd like you to put things that you like, your observations and your questions. What are you noticing and what are you wondering? Go ahead. There's no sound to the video, by the way, just. All right. All right, good. I'm looking at the chat, and feel free to unmute your mic too and share some noticings and wonderings as well. Happy to hear voices. So a lot of yucks and stuff. So maybe a lot of vegetarians out there. No worries. It's some people are like saying yum. Where do you order it? It is in Chicago. Little sad story. A bunch of us were going to go when NCTM was going to be in Chicago before they canceled it. We had plans to actually go there and order that, but alas, we didn't get it. And so one of the questions I was seeing is someone was asking, how much does it weigh? Which actually is the problem we're going to solve. So we're going to work on this problem right now. If we wanted to use math to figure out how much this weighs, what information would you need to be able to solve that? So go ahead and put it in the chat or unmute your mic and feel free to share just chatting about it.
I don't know. They'd need to know the weight of the meat, the cheese, the bread.
Yeah. All right. So I can give you. Yeah. So some people, interesting. So some people want the weights of all the different parts of the ingredients, like you were suggesting. I've seen that in the chat as well. Others are looking at the sort of the scaling, like what are the dimensions of the burger, and so there's a couple different ways we can do that. Let's go ahead with the ingredients. Here's the list of ingredients right now, and so typically, like if we were doing this as a regular math class, like I would actually put you off into breakout rooms and have you sort of tackle this right now as a group and sort of dig into that. And knowing math teachers, you're all going to like dig into this for a little bit if we were to do that. So to sort of not go too deep into the weeds of that, we're going to sort of stay in the whole group right now. And I'd like you all, I'm going to give you a minute. I'm just going to kind of be quiet for a minute, but as you look at this information, I want you to start devising your plan for solving this problem and identify, are there any problematic areas where like you might need to bring in some extra math that's, this is where it's beyond just like basic calculations. So just take a minute for yourself just to kind of consider that. So could someone unmute their mic and just like, what are some areas you think about solving this problem that might make this a little bit more complicated, where it's not just straight up arithmetic? What elements would require you to sort of dig in a little bit?
Dry ounces versus wet ounces.
Can you say more about that?
They're different measures. So onions are dry, I would assume, and mayonnaise is wet.
Okay. What else?
No, there's decimal multiplication.
Say that one more time.
There's decimal multiplication.
Okay, so it's not just all whole number, right? So now we have, so we're working in whole numbers and decimals. Anything else?
You have the weight before cooking for the beef.
So how would we handle that? Does anyone have a strategy for, I mean, 80 ounces before cooking may not help us get the full answer. So what things do we have to consider? I'm curious, like how people would, yeah, go ahead.
So it's 80% lean, so you're going to lose the fat when you cook.
Okay. And so you'll notice here, like what I like about this task, by the way, if you're interested in this, I'll like, again, there were the slides, but feel free to shoot me an email if you want this task for your students. I'm happy to share all the resources with this. I have it set up in Google Slides for remote learning if you'd like, as well as the videos and all of that. So, but I designed this task because I love the ambiguity with it. Like it's not just a straight up computation where you're going to just basically like crunch numbers and just get an answer. Like you're going to have to account for the variability that's in the world. It's a nice little math modeling task. So we didn't, as I said, we're not going to go do the whole task right now. I want you to get the idea of like just that little bit that we did and considering it of like how that engaged you differently. And let's analyze this now from the standpoint of, you know, had I just given you the straight up raw number problem and what that would have been like, you know, does this interest you as much as the burger interests you? Even if you don't like meat, it's likely that the burger task has a little bit more of an interesting element to it. Well, part of this, let's look at how we're using the 3-part recipe. So how does the burger task do any of these 3 things that I've shared with you? Can someone comment?
Well, it makes them, first of all, it makes them read. It makes them really think about what's going on. Some of the things are, you know, 11 pieces of onion or this, you know, compared to, I think the burger, it said, you know, the entire bun was a total of, you know, it makes them really sit down and read. So it's bringing that in. And then it's really making them think. They're coming up with the numbers themselves. And then what do they do with those numbers? They, you know, like you said, they need to multiply decimals and then they need to add it together. So it's a little more challenging, and it's also something that they're a little more invested in because it's something that, you know, it's kind of cool. So
yeah, and all of those things you mentioned is all raising the stakes. It's requiring more of them. They have to invest more to make sense of that. They're not given all the information that they just have to then do something with. That's raising the stakes. All of those are great examples of that. What about sensory appeal? How does this task boost sensory appeal?
They've probably all had a burger before. They can taste it. They can like have that sense of taste.
Yeah, yeah, and the video, like all of that sort of, it's visceral, right? So it's the idea that we're, even though we're not actually doing that, they don't really smell it, but it evokes sensory memory and stuff. So that's the other piece. And then breaking the script. How does this break the script? In other words, breaking the script is how does it disrupt sort of people's schemas of what math class is?
There's no one right answer, which everyone says math is right or wrong. And in this case, there's no one right answer.
Exactly. So because of this is just an example of how we can build peak moments. A 3-act math task, which is what this is, that's one reason that there's such an appeal for that, because it does these 3 things really well. But it doesn't have to be this big thing. Like if you're wanting to build peak moments, it doesn't mean every task has to have a visual component to it and has to like involve this like math ambiguity and all of that. There's a time and a place for all of this stuff, but you can make small tweaks with these ingredients just to disrupt things a bit. Breaking the script alone does wonders in terms of like helping things stand out. You all know how we sort of get into like routines where we tend to get like our brains sort of develop autopilot in a lot of ways. There's actually a study done on looking at what happens with our brains when we're presented with different stimuli. So in the study, they had shown participants images, and one of the parts of it was they kept showing this shoe. And so like as people were watching this image flash for a certain amount of time, they would see the same image over time. And then at some point they would see something as you're watching right now. And at some point the image changes. And then, as they go through that series, they were asked to rate which of the images was on the screen the longest, and not how many iterations it was. Meaning, the images were displayed for a certain number of seconds, and they were asked to recall which one felt like it was on the screen for the longest number of seconds. And so what turned out is a lot of people would say the flower felt like it was on the screen longer, when in fact they were all shown the equal amount of time. But what happened is what they call the oddball effect. Surprise stretches time. So what's actually happening here, the psychology of it, is that when you're presented with a new idea, like in this case, a new image, your brain starts to write a script for it. You start identifying all the things, laces and brown, it looks like my dad's shoe, all of that stuff. The next time you see that thing, you already have a schema for it. You already have the script written. So you just recognize, oh, it's the same brown shoe. So you stop writing a script. You can kind of just make all the assumptions on it. After a while, I'm sure some of you are like, all right, we get it, enough with the shoe. And so your brain just sort of disassociates with the stimuli. Then you're presented with a new novel image here in this case, and your brain starts to write a script again. Well, script writing slows your brain down. It basically, when we're on autopilot, we're spacing out, we're zoning out, time kind of flies by. When we're very aware and paying attention, time is slowed down, and that's what's happening here. And we see this whenever you've taken a road trip with your family, and on your way to a new place, it often seems, if you raise your hand if you agree with this, that it seems like the trip there takes a lot longer than the trip home, right? Is that, how many of you would say that that seems like the case, right? Yeah. And the reason that is when you're driving somewhere new, you are taking in all of the stimuli, where you are writing scripts for that trip. On the way home, you've seen those things, and so you're zoning out a lot more. This is also true in a lot of aspects of our lives. Autopilot is, like I like to call it, is I mean, it's a survival mechanism. If every day you had to consciously think about every single decision you made, you'd exhaust your brain. We need to have schemas. We need to have automaticity in a lot of our lives. But I'm going to make the argument that autopilot in math class is a bad thing. Now, I want to clarify. I don't mean automaticity is a bad thing. I'm not saying that we don't want students to have good recall and have good fact fluency and all of that. Like that, we do want that. When I talk about an autopilot, I'm talking about minds off math, like not even think, like plug and chug, that kind of math where, like, for example, students don't even like really think about the math that they're doing. They're just looking at like isolated pieces, and they're just plugging in procedures to get an answer. And that's the thing we want to avoid. And if we think about historically, like our script, like what was your script for math class growing up? My script when I was a student, like math class just was a bunch of sheets, and it was encouraging us. The amount of math that we got to do, 30 problems a day, the only way you could get through it all is to plug and chug and be on autopilot. We were conditioned to do that, and there's danger in that. My second graders, so one of the things that I would do when I taught second grade, a routine that we used was called Today's Number, where students would have to figure out how to express whatever number of days we've been in school in they'd create expressions that total that number. So they would do ways to make 29. And so what my students would do after a little while is they would do like 29, 28, 27, plus, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, the complete autopilot, not even paying attention at all. And that's just not helpful. And so one of the things that I did, having read the curriculum that actually suggested it in the beginning, I'll admit, I was just kind of skipping a lot of the reading of the curriculum as a new teacher and kind of winging it. But as I actually started to learn the materials, it said that, it said basically that you want to mix this up. You want to put some constraints on that. And once I started trying that, so this routine of doing today's number every day, I would change it. And so they would come in, and today you had to make today's number, and you had to do it with 3 add-ins. Like I just flipped the script a little bit. Or maybe another day you're using only subtraction, or maybe multiples of 5 to make that number, or you have to use combinations of 10 or addition and subtraction. And what happened was, it was remarkable. Students re-engaged with that. What was a stale activity for them and me became a really rich moment of sort of looking at the behavior of these different conditions and what the resulting strategies were. The kids got so excited that they designed their own constraints. These are some of the ones that my students came up with as just rules that they could put in place. And we even did like free choice day where you can sort of use any of the ones that you want. And then we had like marathon days where you had to use all of them. And this became moved from a stale activity to a really enriching one just by breaking the script. So you don't have to do everything like a 3-act task. You can just mix things up to build a peak moment. One other thing is when I work with secondary teachers, I was working in a high school, and one of the teachers I was working with was really feeling like she wanted to start her class off differently. She used to do homework review. She had like a do now and then homework review. And she said she just wants something to sort of spark excitement. And we started looking at like, what are some routines that you could try just for 5 minutes as like a warm up that's besides like a homework review and stuff. And so one of the ones we were looking at was Would You Rather. And John Stevens has wouldyourathermath.com. If you haven't seen that, check it out, please. But I designed one that inspired by John, but I created my own that we ended up using with the high school students. And it was, would you rather win $500 a week for life or win $1 million? And so I'd like you to think for a minute, what would you rather have? And then I'd like you now to go ahead in the chat and or on the microphone, give us your reason. And feel free to unmute your mic too. I love the chat, but I love voices better.
It depends.
Because I could invest.
It depends how old you are.
So we got to think about life expectancy, right? And sort of your age. What else? What other factors are influencing your decision?
Do I need it now or do I not need it now?
Okay, right. What else?
Taxes.
Yeah, we got to consider taxes now.
I just have to have the money up front versus long term.
Exactly, right? Interesting. I love looking through some of these ideas. Yeah, there's
what's the interest rate?
What's the interest rate? You know, could you invest $1 million and make more? Interesting. There's a lot of great considerations. So what you're noticing, just this little task here, there's not a right answer for this at all. But what we found was that just this conversation, just this question, caused students, they didn't want to stop after 5 minutes. And the teacher, she did stop. Like, it wasn't like, all right, well, we're just going to do this today instead of the lesson, because you need to keep going with your lesson. But what she did was, for the whole week, the students, like the first 5 minutes of class was to talk about this. And what was cool was that they went home and they told their families about this, and they, like, the dinner conversations were like, which one, and different family members had different ideas. And then students would come back and they had new variables to throw into the mix based on what their mom or dad or grandmother or whoever was home said. And it made for just a really exciting time. Students were excited to do this. Again, it's a peak moment by breaking the script, kind of changing it up, and starting the math class off with something a little exciting. And so these are ways that we can start doing this work. And one last caveat with the building peak moments and all of this is that what I'm not saying is that every day needs to be a peak moment. You also have to remember, like, what makes things stand out, what makes something an elevated moment is because it's different. And so I don't want you to think that as a teacher now you have to invent all of these sensory appeal aspects of mathematics and spend 30 hours developing all this stuff. What it does say, though, is that making slight changes to what you do will re-engage students. Beware of routine when it becomes autopilot, where students aren't thinking anymore. And when it's getting to that point, disrupt it. Disrupt that routine to re-engage their cognition. And then also think about times where you might push into some of the creative space here to sort of flex a little bit and make some moments that are going to rise above the everyday. This is one way of building moments that will stand out. So all of that is elevation. I told you we were going to do a deep dive on elevation. So let's look at another kind of moment that can stand out. Not every moment is an elevated moment. There's also moments of pride. And so let's do a light touch on pride. So for moments of pride, Chip and Dan Heath say these are the moments that capture us at our best when we've achieved things or when we've demonstrated courage. And this is really important because a lot of times we think of pride as like success, like when we were right, when we solved the problem, when we got the A on the test. But pride moments are also when you were able to stick through something, even if you didn't win. And I think of like the original Rocky, spoiler alert, sorry, he doesn't win. But you think like in the original Rocky, the way Hollywood works, like he's going to win the fight, but he doesn't, he loses. And yet it's a happy ending. What made this a happy ending? Who saw Rocky 1? Why was this a happy ending in this story?
Yeah, I watched it back in 1980s, and that courage that I didn't give up. I didn't give up. I fought to my best. Sometimes even if you win, you really can't enjoy your best. And once you lose, this for sure, you have given your best. That's the satisfaction you have.
Well, I couldn't say it any better myself. That well said. I appreciate the Adrian call out in the chat too. Adrian! But yeah, right. He Apollo Creed, who he fought, always knocked everyone out. No one could last 12 rounds with Apollo Creed, and he did. He didn't get knocked out. He lost, but he didn't get knocked out. And so he persevered, right? So this is the idea in a math class, is that we can really leverage this. Now, there's a couple elements from the book that I think have relationship to math. The first is what they talk about when they mention the recognition gap. This comes from the work of Carolyn Wiley rather. And it was from the business world, but it has a lot of implications in education. What she found was, well, first of all, she identified one of the biggest factors of job satisfaction across any career is recognition for work done. When somebody, particularly someone who's a supervisor, so in education, like a principal, superintendent, recognizes the work that you're doing, genuinely recognizes that like you're really just doing amazing work, and they just appreciate your contributions to the school, that goes really far for people. That's one of the biggest things. And what they found when they interviewed people who, the bosses, more than 80% of bosses said that they would show frequent recognition of their employees, but they also interviewed the employees and found that less than 20% said they actually received any of this recognition. So there's this recognition gap. And I know personally from me, when I taught, I did not give enough feedback to my students. Like the more I reflect on that, I didn't. And I'll be honest, like when I think about this, like this is actual student work from my second grade class. And honestly, like when I would take home, because I'm in generalist, elementary, I taught every subject. I'd bring home stacks of stuff to go through. Lots of times I would grade it. And if a student got it right, that's what they'd get from me. I don't even know what that means, but like, check, they got that. So check it's done, check it's right. Like that's the feedback. If I was feeling like I had a little bit more energy, maybe they'd get a good out of me. If I was super happy, they'd get a great. None of that actually really says anything. I want you to compare that with this, and let me just make it full screen for you. So take a peek at that. And what do you notice about that feedback? Specific, personalized. I'm just reading some of the things in the chat. Feel free to unmute and chat too. Encourage.
The second one obviously gave a feeling to the student, that personalized feeling. You have attention to the students. You have appreciated every effort of the students, and the best thing is you are concerned about the students. That really works really good with the students. I've seen with my high school students a lot.
Yeah. And I'm noticing too in the chat, people are saying like, yeah, recognizing the strategy reinforces, the method and sort of nice penmanship. Yeah, I wish that was my penmanship. I write like a third grader. Yeah, that thankfully for like handwriting font in computers. So, but this is something that what I'm getting at here is some of you probably saw that and thought, how in the world are you going to give this to all your students? If I have 25 students, I have 30 students. Am I going to do this every single night? No, you're not. So one of the things I'll just say right off the bat is, so if you remember, with memorable moments, or like, you can't do that every day. Like if you went to Disney World every day, Disney World loses its luster after like 3 days for me, I'll be honest. And maybe some of you are like, I could do a week or 10 days. At some point though, even the most ardent Disney fan's gonna be like, all right, I need something. I need just to eat some regular food and see nature. Because like what makes special events and what makes things stand out is that it's not automatic. If we were to give our students this kind of feedback every day, every time, what's gonna happen?
Not reading.
It's just going to be ineffective. Like after a while, it's just going to be, you're expecting it, you know what's going to happen. It's not going to be a wow moment. So
exactly. So
that becomes monotonous.
Right. So we normalize this idea of like they're going to get a paragraph that you now have to read when you turn that work in, and so it doesn't. So the students aren't going to appreciate it, and you're going to exhaust yourself. Right? It's not helpful in any way. But if once a month, every one of your students got something that had this level of feedback to them, just once a month, that's easy to do as a teacher. You can manage that. And because it's intermittent, these become fridge-worthy moments. Regardless of your age, family members are going to want, like, this is going to make the fridge because it really does recognize the effort. Notice that it's not necessarily praising the answer. It's recognizing sort of the work that went into that. So that's getting that whole idea of mindset and growth mindset and encouraging students to think about what they're putting forward into the effort versus praising the outcome. So the idea here with this is to think about the kinds of feedback that you're giving students and to give them genuine feedback and not programmatic feedback. So personal, not programmatic is the way to go. And so that's a little bit on there. One other quick thing that talk about in this book, and it's something to consider, is just multiplying milestones to build in more moments of pride. Again, anytime that we can help people feel like they've something they can be proud about in their work, it helps. So the idea is that with multiplying milestones, we have long journeys. If you actually look here, like way in the background here is a finish line for this road. But it's so far out. And if you imagine, like you can see it way back there, that's the finish line. If we were to think of this as the metaphorical school year, we're at the start of the school year and the end is way down there. It's pretty overwhelming, particularly for students who are struggling with a subject and wondering how they're going to get through all of this. But if you were to set up incremental moments during the school year to look at milestone achievements that happen. So like I think of, for instance, like 8th grade mathematics, or like any mathematics class, secondary math as well, or first grade math, that there's sort of learning targets that we're trying to hit throughout the year. And there are certain fundamental elements that students need to understand in order to do more work with that. And so like, for instance, in middle school, we want our students to have a really good conceptual understanding of integers, like how integers behave, so that they can understand operations with integers and make sense of multiplication and division and addition and subtraction with positive and negative numbers. But as students achieve certain conceptual understandings of a concept, we as educators often recognize that. We know the continuum. And so in our head, we're like, oh, cool, they're on trajectory, they're on target to sort of meet these later standards. But I found I never really communicated this with students, and I never set up moments for students to have some recognition for reaching certain milestones in these understandings. And so just as an example, like the reason this is important, Steve Cam wrote a book called Level Up Your Life, where he found that when you break down a complicated goal into incremental steps of like intermittent reward, it helps people stick with it longer. So this is like Couch to 5K programs, any of these things. When he wrote the book, one of the things he wanted to do was he wanted to learn how to play fiddle, something he'd been avoiding for a long time. And so what he did is he actually gamified it. He would come up with these levels because he found like when he was trying to learn how to play fiddle, like he would just say like, oh, I'd love to learn to play. And yeah, one of these days I should take some lessons. I'll get around to it at some point. But when he wrote the book, he decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and like break it down. And so he broke down the process of learning fiddle and sort of put it like video games, like level 1 would be commit to 1 fiddle lesson per week and practice for 15 minutes a day. Once he did that, then he like unlocked level 2, which is relearn how to play, learn how to read sheet music and then complete Celtic Fiddle Tunes by Craig Duncan. And then level 3 was
Can you wait just so I'm done?
Then he,
15 minutes, Mark.
one of the things that he learned how to play Concerning Hobbits from Lord of the Rings. If you're a gamer at all, you know there's also like a boss battle. So after all these incremental steps, the boss battle was to play the fiddle in a pub for 30 minutes, which he did. So he took a complicated thing that he was having a hard time achieving, broke it down into incremental steps that he could reward himself for achieving, and it sort of helped that longer journey. And so I think about like the implications for like in like second grade, like for my students, like, you know, what I want my students to do is eventually achieve numerical reasoning around operations with like addition and stuff, where they could actually solve problems numerically and not need physical objects and things. But that's way down there for a lot of second graders. It's hard to get to. So it often starts with kids coming in who do this. This is their first approach to adding. They just make a bunch of tally marks. And so one of the things that I consider now is like, you can actually look at all the incremental milestones to achieve any sort of math idea. There's like building blocks that happen before it. So these are sort of the progressions of learning how to think numerically with addition that students need to go through. I'll show you the whole thing. Like this is kind of what it looks like all spread out. But when I was a teacher in the class, I knew this, and I tracked this in my sort of my observation book, where I kept track of my student thinking and where they were and when I did assessing, but I never shared it with students. And I'm not advocating like public displays of like, who's at what point. But I do think personally, letting students in on sort of the progression of these ideas and sort of what happens when actually paints the picture, like the roadmap of where they should be going and how they're going to get there and how they're doing on that journey, which as adults, how important is that to you if you're on a tough learning trajectory? You know, for me, it was like getting my doctorate. They actually had a roadmap sort of all the things that happen. And I was able to all along the process kind of see where I was, and like it gave me a sense of what was coming. That makes a big difference. We as adults really appreciate it. How often do we do this for our students? So I'll just challenge you to think about ways that you can integrate that into your classes. So that's a little bit for Pride. Let's look at insight for math. So moments of insight. Moments of insight here are moments that rewire our understanding of ourselves and our world. And I'm going to sort of tweak it a little bit and say, like in the math class, moments of insight rewire students' understandings of themselves and of mathematics. And I'm going to share, like, so when we talk about insight is both gaining deep knowledge of the subject that you're learning and deep knowledge of your capabilities within it. This is like the real big idea of like we learn about ourselves mathematically in these moments of insight. And my first sort of foray into sort of this kind of insight came when I did a date night. I surprised my wife with a date night. I told her to block off her Friday night. We're going to do something romantic. And I took her to the Agawam Axe House. And we did this. I actually thought it was going to be, in my head, we were going to get a lesson on how to throw axes. I was actually surprised when they said that they aren't going to teach us how to do that. They said they can't actually, like we have to sort of work through the struggle on our own. And they gave us a safety demonstration and that was it. And then we were left for like 15 minutes banging it off the wall, having it bounce back at us. And like, it wasn't easy. And we had to keep changing our grip, changing our stance, moving forward, moving backward, all of that, till eventually it worked. Like eventually we could get it to stick into the board, and then eventually we can get it to stick into the bullseyes. And once we could do that, then they came over and it was like, and at that point they were able to, like, they upgraded us, like you get new axes and things. And like, it was a fun time. And, but the parallels of what happened here matched math class perfectly, because what they said is like, they couldn't tell it. They couldn't do a PowerPoint on how to throw an axe because we had to understand it for ourselves. And it reminds me of my favorite quote by Deborah Shifter and Kathy Fosno, which is, no matter how lucidly and patiently teachers explain to their students, they cannot understand for their students. And that's so true in math class. And so when we want students to have moments of insight in math, what we need to do is give them an opportunity to struggle and develop that understanding. A lot of times as teachers, we try to eliminate that struggle. I think of sort of the range of like, are you more of a David Hasselhoff, or are you more of a lifeguard or swim instructor? Are you more a lifeguard or more of a swim instructor in math class? And I'll tell you, I was the David Hasselhoff of math when I first started teaching. I used to see my job as explaining things really clearly to kids, giving them work to do, and then sitting back and waiting for the hands to come up and rescue them. But if you think about this, these two jobs, lifeguard and swim instructor, they're similar, right? Neither want kids dying. Like, that's a bad thing. Like but a lifeguard's job is actually reduce struggle, and sometimes even just eliminating it. Whereas a swim instructor's job is to encourage that. If you ever watch like a really like emergent swim lesson with like a 3-year-old, it's terrifying. They're barely out of the water. But why do swim instructors give students the least amount of flotation support when they're doing swim lessons? If you've ever watched like a young swim lesson happening, what's the point of having kids barely have their heads above water? Why do they do that?
So they can figure it out.
Right?
Have to figure it out. And then, eventually they do, but it is a struggle, but they figure it out.
Exactly. Right. And so the thing that happens is when we can get out of the way and let kids struggle a bit, and that productive struggle, not that frustration struggle, but the productive struggle, and give the least amount of support, what we're going to see is kids are going to get some insight, and you're going to get some insight. Let me just share one other anecdote from my classroom. So when I was teaching second grade, one of the things that happens a lot for second graders is once they master addition, we go to subtraction, and they immediately try to use all their numerical reasoning for subtraction as well. And it's problematic because it doesn't behave the same way. And so one day we were doing this problem, and one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about is Van der Waals' work and this whole idea of this conceptual understanding pentagon of like, if students truly have a deep conceptual understanding of a math concept, they should be able to contextualize it, create models of it, express it with words, visual representations, or numerically through equations. And so I was really trying to embrace this. I was really trying to get kids to struggle a bit. And so we were doing the problem. And when we were talking about it, sort of how we might approach this problem, they wanted to use their tens and ones strategy, basically decomposing into tens and ones. And so they figured you can get 43 and you can remove 20 at least. So you do 40 minus 20 is 20. And then we got to this spot where, again, we're in the whole class right now, and some kids are saying you couldn't do it. Like, you can't take 7 from 3. And we're having this discussion. Now, David Hasselhoff, Mike, would have jumped in and explained how they should take some from the tens and then break it into the ones, and then you'd have enough ones to take away. But at this point, I moved away from the lifeguard, and I decided to just re-engage them. And I said, go off with your groups, and I want you to figure out, like, there has to be an answer to this. And my expectation was that some kids were going to say, discover that you could decompose a 10 into ones and you're good. Something else happened though. Because I got out of their way and they played around with this, there was a group, Ben and Tallulah actually came up with this, where they said when we came back together that, yeah, you can't take 7 from 3. And I didn't correct them at that point. It's like emergent thinking, right? But they said a 7 has a 3 and a 4 in it. So you can at least take the 3 away, but you still have to take the 4 away. And that's how they wrote it. They didn't say -4. They said you still have to take the 4 away. Now, I'll be totally honest. I thought they were wrong. I'm like, I didn't know what was going to happen with this. So I said, yeah, okay, so what are you going to take the 4 away from? And then Tallulah's like, well, like from the 20. And I thought, holy crap. Like at work, like it surprised me. And then I thought, okay, that's just one of those things that's just a convenience or a coincidence rather. But it turns out it works all the time. And I never knew that. And so when we talk about moments of insight, the struggle by having students have to really conceptualize the mathematics, they're going to get deeper insight into the math. And so are you. And the more you, as an adult learner, whatever subject you teach, the more you try to deepen your conceptual understanding of the mathematics you teach, the greater your insights are going to be. One of the most powerful things we can do for ourselves professionally is to do mathematics and to dig in to understand more completely the math that we teach. The more we understand, the more fluid we can be in our teaching of it. And so insights are really important. And so that struggle allows us to get insights and allows our students to get insights. We're going to wrap up now in this last 5 minutes just to talk about moments of connection, because these are also important. So we're going to embrace struggle for the insight, but moments of connection are the last kind of moment that we want to accentuate in the classroom. Chip and Dan Heath define these as social moments that bond us, where we feel warmth, unity, empathy, and validation. And this is all about class sort of class community and struggle and everything. And I think about like I'm a big World War II buff. I love to read about it and study it. And there's a group called the 101st Airborne Easy Company of the 101st Airborne. Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg did a miniseries for HBO called Band of Brothers on them. Stephen Ambrose wrote a book about them. Their bond from their shared struggle was so solid and so tight that it carried well into their adult years. Those that were fortunate enough to survive the war had a bond. That's why they call it Band of Brothers. But there's something about having that shared struggle. So in the book, they say people will welcome struggle when it's their choice to participate, when they're given autonomy to work, and when the mission's meaningful. I tweaked this a little bit to think about the math classroom to say students will welcome struggle when it's their choice in terms of how to participate, when they're given autonomy to work, and when the assignment is meaningful. And so that if you can create what they call a synchronized moment for students to collaborate and struggle together in a meaningful way, the class is going to bond. And so real quick, one of the things I was working on with a class is I was working with, I was coaching some third grade teachers, and they, in their curriculum, they actually had a lesson that was teaching the 9's finger trick. So like, if you're not familiar with the 9's trick, like to do 5 times 9, what do you have to do with this trick?
Hold down the 5 finger.
All right, drop the 5th finger, right? Get rid of the 5th finger, gone. And so you've got 4 fingers to the left of the severed finger, 5 fingers to the right, answer's 45, right? In the actual math book, this was the lesson called the quick 9s. And they said, this always confuses the kids. What are we going to do? So we redesigned this lesson to do something a little bit more challenging and a little bit more useful than a trick. So what we started doing was looking at the regularity and the relationship between multiplying by 9 and multiplying by 10. And so I began by just posing this to the third graders and asked them just to see what they noticed. And eventually they noticed that the answer is really just the difference of one factor. And so I said, all right, well, I want you, will this always work? And I want you to work with your partners to figure out, like, how can you articulate the rule? What's the rule here? And so the kids struggled. It was really hard for them. And a lot of times the teachers are like, oh, we should just jump in and show them. And they're like, no, let's let them dig into it. This is what they eventually came up with on their own. When you want to times something by 9, just times the something by 10, and then minus the something. Just think of the beauty of that right now. Think of the understanding that these kids had from doing this work. And we weren't finished. They said that it was hard. And I said, well, we're not done yet. I want you to prove it now. Let's build a representation that shows that your rule works for every number. And so they started doing things. Some groups would actually like make arrays, like a 9 by 5, and then they'd show like making it a 10 by 5. And then just show like the removal, they'd sort of cross it out and stuff to show it. That shows that it works for one instance. Others, when I challenged them to go and show that it works for any number, one group came up with this. They had an open area model, and they said, this is 9 times something, and this is 10 times something. And so this is 10 times something minus something. 3rd grade, mind you. This is like the power of this. So this is both insight, but also a moment of connection, because I asked them afterwards when we debriefed what this was like for them. These are some of the comments. One of the kids said it was cool because we figured it out together. I thought it was hard, but in a good way. It was hard for all of us, and that was okay. And at first we didn't know what to do, but then we all just got it. Notice the community connection with all of this. So the reason I share all of this is because as teachers, as educators, our challenge is what we're trying to do is we're trying to make math class a place where students can have elevated experiences, where they can be proud of their work to do, both when they're successful and when they struggle through a problem, even if they're wrong with it, where they develop insight both into the mathematics that they're learning and their own capabilities to really be successful within that. And then to develop strong connections with their classmates so they can live and work in a community of sort of shared vulnerability where they can support one another so they can take risks and grow further in this work together. When I think back to Mr. Finn, everything about these, all 4 of these moments were part of that. It was a heightened experience being in his office. I was extremely proud that he was proud of me. That filled me with such joy. He gave me insight into myself and my behavior and why I act the way I act and what I could do differently. And we certainly had a connection. That's why that moment stands out. One aside with this story is that I eventually did finish that book. When I was getting my master's degree, I took a children's lit class. This was one of the required readings. And I wrote to the professor to say, I can't read this book. And I explained why. I left out the Playboy part and all that. But she wrote back to me and she said, Mr. Finn would have wanted you to finish that book. You need to finish that, you know. And I did. And I'll tell you this, as an educator reading it, it brought back a lot of memories. But I also realized that I was busy as a classroom teacher, and I really valued those 15 minutes when the kids went out to recess and I could eat and go to the bathroom. And I think about how busy Mr. Finn was and how he gave up 15 minutes a day for a kid that was a thorn in his side, and what a difference that made to me. And so not only was this a moment that really resonates with me, but as an educator, I've really tried to, from that point forward, to be a Mr. Finn for my students as well. And so I encourage you to think about those same things. And I encourage you to think about how you're going to take the work from today and create powerful math moments that are going to stand out for you, for your students. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for spending time with me today. Feel free to reach out if you want any of the supporting materials, and just appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, Mike. And thank you guys for registering for the conference and seeing as well. His materials are available on the website as well. And just can't say enough how great it was to have you, Mike. Take care.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.